Welcome to the Defence Connect podcast, Australia's leading voice in national security and defence industry intelligence, direct from the nation's top policy and business experts.
Welcome to the Defence Connect podcast. You've got senior journalist Robert Dougherty and two guests here, actually. We've got Philippe Odouard from the former CEO of XTEK, now HighCom Systems and Quickstep. And we've got Bodd, co-founder and chief technology officer, David McLaughlin. We're talking today about defence policy seen by industry and the effects and some forecast changes from the NDAS released earlier this year. That's the National Defence Strategy 2026. Welcome to the podcast, Philippe and Dave.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
XTEK is an Australian body armour manufacturer, and now HighCom, obviously, and they shifted production from Australia to the US late last year, I believe in 2025. And Bodd is still doing 3D body scanning, and they're able to measure soldier equipment and then fit it. And they're based in Australia, but they also have clients in New Zealand. Welcome to the podcast, guys. I'll just crack us off with the first question. The NDS strategy talks a lot about sovereign industrial capability. Is Australia becoming more domestically focused on sovereign capability, or is it just that there's more rhetoric around it and it's of more importance to, say, politicians or political parties? We'll start off with Philippe, if that's all right.
Sure. Well, as you probably know, there has been many policies in the past, 20, 30 years about local content or involvement of industry, and they've been more or less successful, probably less than more. But there are a few things that actually happened and were very, very, very good. I just want to take about four examples. One is the phased array radars that have been fitted on ships done by this company in Canberra. It took them about 10 years before it was imposed. It was sitting on top of the White House before it was on one of our ships. But it happened at the end of the day. It was really IP from Australia, and it was an excellent thing. And I made due diligence on that at the time, so I know a fair bit about it. Fact is that it was imposed at the end of the day by the government to the Navy, and to the delight of the Navy, by the way. It actually worked very well on the Anzac ships, and more recently was imposed on I think it was the Hunter class. So that's one very successful one. There's another one, which is the F-35, which I was directly involved in. There again, the government basically said, look, there will be some local content. It will be parts made out of composites. And there was 2.5 contenders at the time, Boeing and Airbus in Australia, which made some components for aerospace in there. Both of them being competitors to Lockheed Martin, the designer of the F-35. And it ended up with us at Quickstep, which we had a lot less capability, but we were a startup. At the end of the day, it actually functioned, and it's still delivering very good things. It was by far the most risky supplier. We were the most risky supplier of the whole lot of the F-35 supply chains, but it was imposed on Lockheed to a large extent. The third one is probably the Bushmaster, which is a good IP from Australia, which was again took a long time, but there was a first contract from the Australian government, and there was a big push for years and years, which led to final more orders on one side and exports on the other. So that's IP again, like the phased array. F-35 was no IP. And the last one that I would take, which is more recent, is the guided weapons local manufacture, which was sort of decided between Australia and the US to sort of fend off some problems that may happen in terms of the dissolution of possible deliveries out of the US into Australia in case of contingency. It's again, that was taken very nicely between the two countries. It was a local manufacture of weapons that were made and proven in the US, so very little IP. but at least there is a potential to do something of great value, and I think it is very successful. It's actually coming up now. So it gives you some of the more recent and successes, but they are not very many, to be frank. And so how could we get better policies? And I think we should learn from those four to sort of see what could be done.
Mm-hmm. I recall speaking to someone from industry, perhaps at IODS or could have been at Land Forces, and they were saying the Australian defence industry is often treated like a spotlight. There are spotlights on big IP projects from the Australian government, but often SMEs outside of the spotlight do not receive, I guess, enough funding or may struggle in some of the supply terms. Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about what the NDS spoke to you, and what were some of the key takeaways that you thought sovereign capability discussed?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And I think, Philippe opened his remarks there by saying that there's been various models that some have done okay and others haven't done as well. But I think what the government is probably admitting here is maybe that the old model hasn't worked. And I think the defence strategy says it fairly plainly that buying off the shelf from overseas probably no longer gets you capability fast enough. And I think they're trying to back that up now with real machinery. So I think the new Defence Delivery Agency is probably a good example of that. I think Philippe spoke to a couple of really good real-world examples, but I think we are hopefully starting to see money and decisions starting to follow the words. We've got the aim of getting defence spending to 3% of GDP by 2033. I think the Mitsubishi, the Mogami frigate deal is probably a really interesting template here. So the first three being built in Japan for speed, and then the production moving back to WA if the conditions are right. So it's not rhetoric. It's a contract that's structured around building real sovereign capability. But I think the honest test probably still lies ahead here. I think the delivery agency consolidation starts this year from July, and I think that's where we'll see where the rubber hits the road and where the procurement behaviour will genuinely change. But I think the direction is genuine and probably unmistakable to some degree. I think from our perspective, we're living it. We're an Australian designed, we're an Australian built, manufactured technology and capability. And I think probably the last time that we had some articles or content written about us on Defence Connect, our technology's come a long way. We started as an apparel sizing technology, but we're now doing a lot more around human body data as a broader set. So capturing things like health and wellness and vitals and body composition, which are applicable to defence, but we're a dual use capability. So we're not a pure play defence organisation. We've got incredible contracts in a whole range of industries. But I think all of the industries that we work with, they're kind of asking the same supply chain questions, particularly in times of global uncertainty and potential supply chain disruption.
Yeah. It's a good point. And just on that note, we might take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about a sustainable defence manufacturing. Welcome back to the Defence Connect podcast. You've got senior journalist Robert Dougherty. We're talking about sustainability in terms of defence manufacturing. Maybe we'll go to Philippe for this one. Obviously, you led XTEK, which is now HighCom, and Quickstep in the Australian defence sector. Looking at that period of time, what's changed over the years, and what kind of hasn't changed in building sustainable defence manufacturing in Australia?
There has been lots of good intentions, but I think one of the main issues that we've had to get through is the willingness or not willingness of the government to sort of say to impose a local content of some nature, local content with or without IP from Australia. With IP is better. Without IP is better than nothing. And it's also a willingness to buy local, and buy local means something that is probably not unproven by definition. If you want to have a new technology, you're likely to sort of have to make it happen in your own country. And for that, you have to have the defense forces, willing to sort of buy from you, and buy from you in a relatively immature technology compared to what you can buy out of the US or out of Europe. So and I don't think we have pockets of that willingness, and that has been forced very strongly or not too strongly by the system. But it's what we miss the most, and miss the most between a project that has R&D that looks successful to an actual program that actually delivers goods at the end of the day, and not only delivers good in terms of a prototype, which is the first step, but also continuous buying on the other side. I mean, it's not good enough to sort of say, well, we'll do you a contract for 10 of those prototypes, and then buy the mature product out of overseas. And God knows how many times that has happened in defense.
Mm.
So I think they really need that sort of really political willingness to sort of say yes, and that's what we need for industry to sort of be successful, and get us, the possibility of supplying those very interesting contracts.
Mm. I think from that specific example, certainly we hear rumors about new drone systems being developed. They're quite at the forefront of military innovation, and we hear that the Australian Army and Defence has experimentation, orders, 1 or 2 systems, 5 systems, but then they're adopted overseas in bulk. So certainly you can see that example in the wider defence community as well. Dave, in Bodd's commercial position in Australia, obviously they're based here, but then you're, as far as I'm aware, supplying out to New Zealand. How did you come to that idea of staying in Australia when perhaps it could have been easier to manufacture offshore or head out to the US under the Department of Defence there?
Yeah, I think we're exporting to most major markets currently. So a large share of our revenue is actually coming out of North America. We've got contracts in Middle East and Europe as well. So we've got work in Australia in our own backyard, but we're realizing very quickly that the growth from a revenue perspective is offshore. But interestingly, we've remained focused on having our headquarters and I guess our core team and operations here in Australia. And staying in Australia wasn't originally a strategy. It was actually due to COVID. I don't want to talk about COVID, but when we were starting to concept and prototype this capability, the world was shut down. So we actually couldn't go anywhere because the borders were closed. So we built it here because we had no choice. But I think that necessity very quickly revealed itself as a real competitive advantage. So having design, engineering, manufacturing all in one place, our team in Melbourne, we've got an incredible relationship from a contracting perspective with Bosch. So we build our scanner hardware literally 25 minutes down the road. So it gave us this speed of iteration and control over everything from quality and components and understanding exactly what was going into our product. And we've never had to offshore any of that since those days. And I think as we grew and as we commercialized, we realized very quickly that the Australian-made aspect of our technology became very quickly a genuine moat for our business. So I think with allied defence organisations, a product that's designed, built and controlled in Australia, it actually answers a lot of their sovereignty and supply chain questions before they even ask them. And again, we're not just a pure play defence organisation. We work with incredible companies globally. We've got contracts with Fortune 500 companies like Disney. We've got deployments across theme parks. We've got scanners with United Airlines sizing their workforce. But they're all asking the same supply chain questions these days. So I guess what was born out of COVID necessity ended up kind of defining part of our commercial edge, and will always be an Australian-made product, and we're proud that we'll keep exporting globally. And as I said, most of our business is coming outside of Australia, but we're investing heavily in our headquarters. We've just unveiled a brand new facility here in Melbourne. We're hiring and we're building the team right here in Melbourne.
Perhaps, Philippe, on this as well. I mean, I know that XTEK, now HighCom, moved over to the US to do their manufacturing. Was that, just run us through some of the reasons that occurred and And I guess why the idea of staying in Australia and doing all the manufacturing here might not have been commercially sensible.
Well, it's a we had a similar policy as Bodd, just explained. Really, it's the idea was to we had our research center in Adelaide. We had we sort of built up a factory there. It was all doing exactly what Dave suggested in that sense, because we thought that having a quick transfer from the research to the production made a lot of sense. We knew that because we bought a company, a manufacturing company in the US that had a chunk of the market in the body armor at the time, that would give us a good insight into the US market, and eventually we would have a second factory there, which was already a manufacturing one. As time went by, the technology matured, and basically the US market was the biggest market in the world. Australia didn't buy anything from us. We insisted. We worked very, very hard to try and convince them. We had the best technology in the world for this, and in the end, only the US market responded. And the problem is that in that sense, if you want to sell to the US, you still have to sort of manufacture locally. Although we have a beautiful treaty with the US saying that Australia is really a local manufacturer, we're not, clearly. So we already had the industrial footprint, and we had a duplication of things that were not justified. So we basically moved all the manufacturing gear from Adelaide to Columbus in Ohio, and remained internal. So in the end, it made sense. But at the end of the day, it was all a question of market. If we had managed to get a footprint in Australia, we would have kept that in Australia, and probably 2 or 3 years later would have actually expanded, as we would have need to grow into a second site. That would have been the US anyway. So it was always on the plan. But the plan was not to close Australia. The plan was to sort of keep Australia going. But at the end of the day, the money took over from, and if we don't have a market locally, well, sorry, but then we go where the market is, and those that mandate the local manufacture.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Just a little follow-up question on that, Philippe. What was the response from, I guess, what was the conversations in the leadership team at the time to make that change? But also, what was the response from policymakers that you'd been engaging with at the time, and also other industry partners in Australia?
Well, obviously, defence didn't have much of a response, to be frank. We had the only helmet that could stop a 765 bullet. No other helmet actually did that. But there was no real interest, and God knows we lobbied at a very high level. We had Christopher Pyne as one of our directors, the ex-Minister for Defence. It's not as if we didn't talk.
Yeah.
to defence. But there was no, there was not sufficiently. I don't know. I mean,
there was no alternative, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, there was an alternative, and the alternative for helmets was import.
Yeah. So
for ballistic protection on the chest, no, it's we had some competitors locally, not as good, but they were there. But for helmets, they were all imported, and they kept on importing them. So
yeah. In terms of the leadership team, what was I imagine you sort of discussed the options, and what was the sort of response when you come to the idea of moving to the US? Manufacturing-wise, completely.
Well, when I left, the decision was not made to sort of close Australia and send it to the US. At the time, we're on the option of having 2 sites. We started close to the R&D, and we would actually have another production facility in the US. But I mean, this when the decision was made, probably about a year after I left, it was so obvious that it was the right decision. We were expecting some orders in the meantime from Australia, but they never happened.
Mm.
Our first order was not in Australia; it was in Finland, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a long way. Just on that, Dave, as well, maybe you can give some thoughts here about if Bodd faced the same situation. Is that idea of offshoring your manufacturing? It can be seen as kind of like a bit of a dirty word in the Australian community. So, how would Bodd, I guess, evaluate that as an option if there was no other way to go around
Yeah,
it?
and I think to Philippe's point, like there is significant growth in various parts of the world, particularly North America. I think right now we're committed to building our product here locally in Australia, and I think, look, one of the benefits of our relationship with Bosch as a manufacturer is that they do have a global network. So there could be a world where we still develop a portion of our capability here, but through the Bosch partnership, potentially there could be pathways for us to build the same capability in different parts of the world. But I think from a kind of core team perspective, we always see that the engine house of this business will be in Melbourne. I think there'll be growth for call it go-to-market, sales, business development teams in different parts of the world, but I imagine that we'll maintain a solid manufacturing base here with a view that, potentially some customers, when you look at some of the large defence organisations, they do require that some capabilities built in their country. But I think we've got, again, the benefit of having an incredible partnership with Bosch where we could potentially lean on and tap into their cell manufacturing or global manufacturing network while retaining the core of our business here in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Just on that as well, Dave, that build up to, I guess, pre-contract, building the company up through to an initial defence contract. How difficult is that in Australia as a defence company? I imagine from what we hear from industry, it's quite hard. Funding can be an issue. Red tape, bureaucracy can be an issue. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think if I'm totally honest, if you're a pure play defence company in Australia, I think scaling from pre-contract, first contract to sustainable manufacturing, it would be incredibly challenging. And I think the procurement, everyone knows this. This is everyone realizes that this is just the reality. That procurement cycles are incredibly long. I think you're carrying a lot of burden with defence certification, security requirements, personnel vetting, foreign ownership controls. So if you're an early stage company and you're taking on board investment, whether it's venture capital or angel investment, you've really got to consider where your funding is coming from, because these things can actually hurt you in the long run and actually impede you from securing defence contracts. And if you're doing all of that before meaningful revenue arrives, that's a real challenge. And look, I've been through personally some of the security on-ramps for different security programs in different countries, and it is demanding. And I think for a defence startup, surviving years of that on investor capital alone, you are well and truly in that really dark place that everyone talks about, where a lot of early stage businesses go to die a very slow and painful death. And I think one of the things that I feel we have been incredibly fortunate to be as a business is that we have, and I mentioned this in one of my earlier responses, that we're genuinely a dual use technology. So we're not reliant on just a major defence contract either here or in a particular region globally. So the commercial deployments in other industries and verticals, they keep the revenue rolling in. We're signing new contracts, we're growing, we're building the team, we're evolving the technology. That allows us to keep growing the business while, I guess, the larger call them marquee defence opportunities work through their very long processes and cycles. So I think And I think the NDS kind of calls for this. They're talking about suppliers with commercial resilience defence can kind of draw on. So they're effectively talking to dual use in that regard. And I think my advice to other Australian companies is probably don't necessarily bet the company on a single defence contract locally. I would probably look to a couple of things. Consider how can the technology be used in other verticals or industries where you may be able to get contracts and deals and deployments done faster. And then look to defence, and then look to other regions globally. We do work in protective services, police, fire. We've got state police, state fire, federal police in different parts of the world, all using our technology. So we haven't just kind of hinged everything on trying to get one particular defence contract. So I think that's a fairly precarious position to put your business in, particularly in those early stages where you've got to keep the lights on and you've got to keep paying staff and the bills keep coming in.
We all want to avoid that slow, dark death you mentioned earlier as well. Philippe, obviously you would know a good example of how to successfully integrate into the US defence market and their defence manufacturing industry there. Obviously, there's a lot more opportunities there. I think we can all agree that that's the case. How can Australian businesses, I guess, sort of simulate the same sort of thing and correctly align their way into US industry?
Well, I mean, the US industry is a very tough one. I mean, basically, the only way you can get in is by having a substantial establishment there, and that's how we actually decided to buy that company in the US when the opportunity was there, and that actually really introduced us into the US market with our technology. But these guys were established; they had products. We sort of included a more sophisticated product designed in Australia into a more mundane range of products that they produced and designed there. So that's probably the best way to do it. What Dave said is actually very true. I mean, at the end of the day, you need to have more iron in the fire than just one. And if it's one contract from defense in Australia, you're really in trouble. It will take too long. It will not take sufficient willingness. You need to find other ways to sort of do it. It could be dual if you go for dual technologies that can go for commercial as well as for defense. It could be a pull from another country and a country that is probably a bit less parochial as the US. I mean, the US can just work on their own. They don't need us. There's plenty of other countries that are prepared to sort of do joint programs together. There was a Norwegian company with us that they did it on their own, but to do a naval missile, for instance, and that we decided to buy, and we got into it afterwards. But that was much easier. Probably it was hard, but it was much easier probably than getting into the supply chains of the US. Or you can actually do what we've done at Quickstep with the F-35 when. Yep. We basically demanded that some of this $16 billion program would have some local content, and that was really followed very nicely by the US, to be frank, and because they gave a similar industry package to all the other partners that joined the program, the F-35 program in Europe and in Asia as well. So that could work. I mean, I think frankly we should use that model for the submarine, for instance. That would work. I mean, I know that we'll probably address that a bit later, but that's a very good way to sort of get into the collaborate with them. And the way we've collaborated with the US on the F-35, both with Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, has been exemplary. I mean, it was a great cooperation. They're very capable people. They were prepared to share the knowledge and take us through the cost decrease that were necessary to sort of get to very large quantities and would make us competitive as well at the same time. So when the Americans want to sort of get us in, they do, and they do it very effectively.
Mm-hmm. Just on that note as well, you were talking about getting into, I guess, international prime supply chains. Do you think in the Australian environment that the Australian defence procurement system, is it more favourable to established international suppliers like defence primes, or does it reward local innovation enough to kind of offset that? Can you see it weighted either way?
The problem, we don't have enough IPs to sort of get into a major program just on our own. It's just, we don't have the companies that have the size, we don't have the IP and the deployment, and we don't have the willingness to design a brand new program. I mean, you have a few major countries, not very many of them, but the US is one, France is another one, the UK is another one. They're prepared to sort of start from a blank sheet of paper and say, well, give me a new submarine, give me a new this, a new that. We always take an existing design and we sort of tweak it a little bit to our needs, which frankly is probably a very good solution seen from the defense forces, because I mean, it's less risky, it's less expensive, it's likely to be more in time and be sort of reasonably up to date if you accept some improvement along the way. But having a 100% IP is much harder. So it's possible to do with small programs, and you have more and more of those nowadays that are coming up. I mean, drones is a very typical one. You can have a complete system designed in Australia with the utmost technology, like Ukraine has managed to do just on their own. I mean, so it's quite possible, and that's why when I went at XTEK, I really favored the other branch of XTEK was drones, and we did a lot of things like this, changing a number of things on the existing drones and putting new systems in it, and that's something that is feasible for a small company. But if you talk about a major ship or a major tank or whatever, that's really not feasible. Then that's when you sort of say, well, let's do a joint program and let's input some IP in there, but it's not going to be all ours anyway.
Yeah. I know we see within the United Arab Emirates, they have their I guess domestic prime in Edge Group, which does a lot of that work in terms of coming up with a new sovereign capability and then sort of sourcing the different parts or making the different parts. Is that something that you sort of seen as a possibility for Australia, Philippe, or could that be similar?
Well, the problem
as a domestic prime? Sorry.
Well, we don't have a domestic prime that can do that. Our domestic primes are all subsidiaries of an overseas prime, and so have a really domestic program at the prime level is for the moment not possible because we don't have a big prime or big primes in general terms. Again, it's the problem is we don't have enough of these programs, and you have if you get one, you may not get the next one, and then you sort of dither at the edges. That's exactly what happened with all the shipyards we've had and all the programs that Australia went through for the past 40 years or so. And so again, the concept of having continuous programs coming, all the major people that can afford the design of a new ship or a new aircraft, whatever, they are wedded with this, for a generation or two, and they go for the next generation. And in the US or in Europe, you have one or two guys that can do that, and they're not put in competition every time. We've had a number of our programs recompeted afterwards for the next generation with another supplier of technology, and we basically restarted from scratch. That was discussed, God knows how many times. There is a bit of that is gradually getting in terms of ASC on one side and the western part of the shipbuilding, getting some of the work on the semi-continuous basis. But it's, it's still not very effective. Hopefully, it will become more effective, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Dave, some of your thoughts as well on this. Is it possible for Australia to have sort of its own sovereign capability in the global defense market, or should we just sort of, I guess, take the role that's there, that's just to be focused on specific niche technologies that we can provide to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think I mean the defence strategy sort of outlines, or it does a good job of pairing and strengthening the sovereign industrial base with, I guess, building a more diverse set of international partnerships, more or less in the same sentence. So I guess no one serious is arguing that Australia is going to make everything. I think the question is, well, what is it that we need to control? And we, you mentioned this earlier. We work with the New Zealand Defence Force. We've got an incredible partnership with the Defence Prime that allowed us to slipstream into that relationship, which is through Australian Defence Apparel. So we've got an amazing relationship with Chris Dixon and the team at ADA. We've got active procurement underway with allied defence forces in the Middle East. We've got strong engagement with UAE and UAE defence primes, and we've got active procurement within North American defence. But I think every organisation or every nation that we deal with, they're kind of running the same calculation. It's full sovereignty over a small set of things that really matter, and then the kind of pragmatic partnerships for the rest of everything else. And I think, what should sit in what do we control? What's the column of stuff that we should control? It's really all the stuff that we kind of need to make, adapt, and repair in a crisis. We need to be able to do those things here. And I think the other control column is the niches where we have a genuine edge and we can own it globally. So data, algorithms, human systems technology, advanced manufacturing. I think we're a small example of that. We're an Australian-built body intelligence platform, which is sold to allied defence forces and global companies. So a niche you can control, I guess, becomes a product that you can export, and the export revenue kind of keeps the sovereign capability alive in some ways. And I think if you look at the other industries that we work in, aviation, retail, uniforms, they're all kind of taking the same practical approach. It's control the critical, and then partner with the rest, or partner for the rest.
Yeah. In terms of those critical components that that must remain onshore from a national security point of view and must be domestically manufactured, Philippe, what are your thoughts on some of those key ones that we have to keep an eye on, that are in a crisis going to let us down if we don't manufacture them domestically?
Well, the ammunition is really the first thing that comes to mind.
It's okay to say body armor as well. It's all right to say that.
Yeah, well, sure, body armor would be good too.
Yeah.
But ammunition. Well, I mean, remember I worked for ADI and now Thales. I was the one that actually purchased. I mean, when the privatization was made, I was the project director for that. So
we should probably say here NATO standard ammunition as well. That's important, right?
So that was actually put together, and there was a recognition that ammunition was important, and therefore when we started that, when we got ADI into Thales, it was obvious that the small caliber and the bombs and shells, basically the basic stuff, which was what was really necessary, were produced here. Were produced in an efficient manner because it had been restructured and we'd done very, very, very well. And that actually Australia built on that as time went by in adding other types of ammunition as it got more sophisticated. And another company in Iowa basically latched onto it to a large extent. But I think to a large extent, the basic ammunition is really produced in quantity, and that was actually acknowledged to a large extent when Europe was out of propellants and explosive when the war with Ukraine started. Australia provided a number of those because we had an excess of those. Provided that to Europe, which then delivered the 155 rounds in particular. So that means it's possible. The next step really is the guided weapon project that is really getting to the next step, which I think is very, very important. I mean, you can see how many of those are used. It's in the press, every day, what's happening in the Middle East and in Ukraine. Obviously, if we rely on the supply chains out of the US, it's going to be, we're going to be overwhelmed by the Chinese well before we can get enough ammunition locally. So I think that is an important one, but you have a lot of others, and you possibly have to also rely on the local fabric of SMEs that have ideas. The problem is exactly what Dave said. I mean, at the end of the day, you can have the best R&D and the best product, in R&D. To be a product that the defense can use, you have a big gap, an expensive gap that has to be funded. And defense is not necessarily very keen in doing this. So how do you do that? Well, exactly what Dave said. Look, try and use that in a dual way. Use other countries to do it if you have the best technology. But it's very tough. I mean, all our competitors in Europe have their own defense to sort of as first client, people that are going to take the risk for you with you. And get the product to a viable one, and not a minimal viable one, a large quantity one. For that, you need orders, and you need orders to sort of. And when you sort of are well established, a lot of others are going to latch onto it, and you can export, and you can actually derive other products, dual technology or just simply defense. The world is your oyster. But if you don't have your own local market to start with, it's very, very, very hard. It's possible, but it's so hard. It's not funny.
Yeah. I think on a previous podcast as well, we were saying with the recent 155mm artillery shell announcements, funding for that, someone could have made a lot of money if they're making 155mm shells, 4 years ago. Incredible amounts of money. On that note, we'll go to a quick break, and when we come back, we'll do a rapid fire round of questions. Welcome back to Defence Connect podcast. You've got senior journalist Robert Dougherty, and we're going to run straight through to a rapid fire round of questions. Perhaps go to Dave for this one first. Obviously, both your companies have dealt with defence procurement. What is the biggest sort of structural weakness in the procurement system that you've noticed across your dealings?
Yeah, I think from where I sit, it's consistent globally to some degree. It's not just a look at what's happening here in Australia, but I think it's that gap between that successful trial or pilot and an actual program. And I think specifically how the two sides experience time. So the system measures time in budget cycles and approval gates. An SME like Bodd or a small company, we measure it in months of runway. So a delay that is a rounding error inside a department or a large government organisation can be existential for a small company. And I think that's an observation, as I said, across every defence market that we operate in. And I think the other part to it is maybe just sometimes a little bit of uncertainty or lack of clarity around the pathway to contract. So we often don't know as a small company who we're going to be procuring or entering into contract with. Is it the prime, or is it the defence organisation directly? And we actually have to invest time in the relationships with both, and the time in sales and marketing in both as well. We do that and it works, but it's kind of doubling your cost of entry in some ways, and you may not know who you're contracting with or going through procurement with until the very end. So I think clearer signals earlier about the contracting pathway would probably lower the barrier for every SME, and it's kind of zero cost to capability.
That's a really unusual one. That last one you're talking about, knowing who the contract's with. I've not heard that before, but I can imagine that would be quite frustrating and time consuming. Philippe, on your side, the defence procurement, where do you see sort of a weakness that can be solved in your dealings with?
I mean, the length of the cycle is just crippling. I mean, it's okay if you're a multinational, and I've been there before, And if you have 2 years or 3 years in front of you, you're fine. I mean, it's probably more like 5 or 10. It's okay. You can disappear from defense for 5 years and get back into it and recognize everything. Well, that has moved to the right, and the same programs are still there. When you see that the Ukrainians are getting enhancements of their software for their drones every week, you suddenly realize how far we are from the reality of a modern war. So and as Dave said, it's terrible when you have a runway disappearing under your feet, and a customer that is saying, "Oh well, we'll let you know next budget cycle." I mean, it's very difficult. So you need to sort of take that into account. You sort of need to adapt. But I mean, a lot of people stumble, and the creativity of the Australian mind. I mean, it's amazing how many scientists and good ideas we have in this country. A very small number only get to market, and most of them, when they get to market, they don't get to market here. And that means, a lot more support from the customer from the moment a good idea seems to come over to the moment it becomes, a real program and a real large quantity product, and a product that is produced on a regular basis that feeds you and allows you to get to the next step and improve it. But you can't have it both ways to a large extent. If you rely on the startup to sort of do the full industrialization before you place the first order, I mean, it's killing yourself, and that's very much what's happening there. So that's something that the government should actually look at very, very carefully. And they have the tendency, they recognize that it is an issue. However, a lot of it is actually coming from the operators. They basically say, we want something proven, we want something fast meaning 2-3 years, 10 years, and then the administration says, well, but it's not local if it's that, by definition. And you have that tension between the system itself, and so all the big examples I've given you there have taken a political decision to sort of say, well, let's do this and impose some solutions to industry on one side, but to the forces on the other.
Something that's sort of different as well, and we use the Ukraine example there, but also their Brave One marketplace is quite interesting in that some of their military units can just order drones through, and then that's paid out. So it's an interesting procurement method that's perhaps a bit faster there. Whether it's applicable to Australia, we'll probably never know, but there's certainly a different way of going about things. In terms of defence procurement, obviously we don't want to hammer defence too much because then no one will get any contracts. What are some of the things that they do really well that you guys really appreciate and shouldn't be curtailed in future?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in there. I think
maybe Dave, go for that one. Yep.
Yeah, what I might talk to is probably the export side of the system. I think is actually genuinely world class, and we've got a really strong relationship with Team Defence Australia, and also sitting alongside Austrade. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to showcase our technology through Team Defence Australia at various significant global defence trade shows and exhibitions. So we've been at Dubai Air Show, we've been at Singapore Air Show, we've been at AUSA. I think we've got a team dropping into Paris next week for Eurosatori. So I think for an Australian SME, that sort of sales, marketing and visibility support is really incredible. And I don't think you find an equivalent of that in most of the other countries that we operate in. But I think it would be great to see more of that on a local scale. So not just taking the great IP overseas to other allied defence organisations, but how can local companies do more business with defence? I think that would be something that would be brilliant to see. But yeah, I guess it's a shout out to Team Defence Australia, who, from our perspective, have been really supportive of us and certainly helped open doors to allied defence and supported us through some of the commercial discussions and conversations where we sort of pick up a phone and ask, hey, is this normal? is this how this happens in this particular country? So we've got really good support with all of the leads across TDA in different parts of the world. So yeah, I would say the export side of things from our perspective is world class.
Yeah, excellent. And Philippe, some of the things defence procurement is doing well on your end that you've seen?
Well, I wouldn't say defense procurement as such, but the system which has takes a strategic perspective, taking it into programs and the continuity you have between the two and the three is actually excellent in Australia. A lot of other countries have an idea, they buy a bit of things, it comes out of nowhere and goes possibly nowhere. Everything we do is very structured. It goes from the general, what do we need globally, how do we achieve that, and gets into programs, and then and that's that you can follow, and that means you can position yourself, you can talk to the primes, you can and you have plenty of time to do it. Typically, a bit less time would be better. But take a country like Canada, for instance. They change their minds every 5 seconds. It's terrible. I mean, the planning is completely out of the window. So we have a very structured way, and it is sufficiently transparent to industry for us to sort of prepare and act accordingly. So I think it's very positive. Other than that, it's not necessarily very easy to sort of work with defense, but when you know how they react and you sort of abide by the rules, you understand the rules and you abide by the rules, it's fairly smooth. They pay properly, in time, and for small companies, it's really, really important. They're very demanding, but I mean, you can't blame them for that. And at the end of the day, when you have a contract, it's normally very smooth, as long as you are smooth as well, and you deliver what you're supposed to deliver. So it's not it's predictable. The whole system is predictable, and it's an enormous advantage in terms of what we do here.
Perhaps some quick rapid fire question as well. What specific reforms would make the biggest difference to SMEs? Maybe we can list some of them. Dave, your thoughts there? Anything that would help out?
Yeah, I think how can we close the gap, and how can we reduce the timelines? So some sort of defined pathway from successful trial to acquisition. I think if a trial succeeds against key criteria, there should be some pre-committed contracting pathway, maybe not a restart of the whole process. I think it should, success on a trial should probably buy you momentum, maybe not a place in a new queue, if that makes sense.
Cool. And Philippe, your side of things as well, that some specific reforms. It could even be to do with the way we do business between Australia and the US. Obviously, that's important as well. I put you on the spot, haven't I? A little bit.
To a certain extent. But I have an interesting story to tell. When I arrived at Quickstep, I sort of looked at the different. We were in aerospace, and I went to see the general in charge of procurement, and I said, "Well, what are the programs that are going to be on offer basically in the next 2 or 3 years?" And we went through the list, and it went from this one, FMS out of the US, that's managed by the US embassy, the Australian embassy in DC. That program, it's FMS, it's going to come out of DC. And we came to the end of the list, and I thought, gee, the 2-star general should have a bit more work to be done, because everything was done. FMS, that means no competition. The US solution, full stop. And there was no real involvement of the industry in all this. That being said, it's the improvement is by mandating a number of things. If it's a small program, you can say, well, we want it to be local. If it's a large program, we wanted a minimum significant input from the industry. But if things are not mandated, sorry, but we're unlikely to be able to compete against the big guys.
Mm-hmm. I think we don't give our two-star generals enough credit. They had to pick up the phone and go, "I want this embassy staff sorted out," But on that note as well, on the US side of things, I mean, AUKUS is obviously the trilateral agreement has brought a lot. It's certainly brought a lot of media attention about submarines. But on the smaller scale and the less heard about scale, is the industry collaboration side of things. In your view, has AUKUS improved opportunities for Australian SMEs, or has it, I guess, concentrated the spotlight onto a handful of US primes and things like that? Maybe we'll go to Dave first for this one as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's probably not my fight, but I'll talk to it in that.
Yeah.
If you look at both pillars, I think the submarines, that there's this kind of enormous concentrated attention and capital on a handful of programs. So if you're not in those supply chains, then I would assume if you're in that position, it probably feels like that there's not a lot of oxygen left in the room. Pillar 2, I think, is probably where companies like Bodd and SMEs would or should be looking. So advanced capabilities, AI, autonomy, machine learning, and I guess just the broader uplift in defence engagement across the 3 countries probably, raises the tide for dual-use technology generally. And I think the practical effect there is that we probably all collectively notice is an uplift in standards. I think AUKUS has probably lifted everyone's expectations on security and export controls. And I think companies that kind of meet that bar probably travel better between the 3 markets. And I can probably hand to Philippe to give his kind of US industrial-based view.
Okay. We'll handball to Philippe. You've got the footy on that one. AUKUS has been a good impact so far, Pillar 2, or we haven't seen much?
Well, I mean, the last thing we saw is that we got two old submarine and a new one for the price of 3 old ones, where the input from us is going to be very limited. So having been involved in the previous submarine program, Collins, I was the supplier of the sonar, which was a major thing, and there was a major involvement of the Australian crew in there. At this stage of the game, the previous program that was basically contracted with the French had a massive involvement of SMEs. It was a real transfer of technology, not only for the building but for the long-term design of the several. They were supposed to be in batch of 4, and every 4 you have a sort of a refresh of the technology and getting a lot of local technology into it. AUKUS is, if we manage to get any construction, I think we'd be happy. But we could have at least I mean, when you look at the decision made by the Brits in terms of the design of the new submarine, I don't think anyone in Australia was involved in that decision. They made the decision and they said, this is the AUKUS design. Thank you. Okay, well, we'll happily take it. Yeah. If we manage to get to a system which looks like what has been done on the F-35, where we do bits, and we do bits not only for us but also for the UK, that will give the longer series and therefore more competitive, and it would make a lot of sense. I mean, if the Americans can do it for their most up-to-date aircraft, I can't see why we can't do a bit of it as well for the submarine. Doing small series on build to print is not the way to go. Participating with a share in the design and a share in the build and a share in the technology is a much better way to do it. I'm not sure there is an absolute willingness to go in that direction, but we seem to see some smaller companies being involved in that. So there might be a bit of momentum coming, probably on its own, without being really directed by the government. If they could, pick up that ball and go for it, I think there is. I mean, neither the Brits nor the Americans can actually do it on their own. They can't produce enough for themselves. So let's help them and help ourselves at the same time.
That does sound really
So
good. Yeah. That's a good
I mean, I
pitch.
think that there's a real potential there.
Make the submarines the new F-35 supply program. Sounds great.
Well, exactly. Just copy exactly what has been done there. I can tell you, we at Quickstep at the time, we sort of got an incredible amount of technology through this, and that really helped. That was really, really nice. And we sort of produced stuff that was up to scratch in terms of cost as well as in terms of technology. So it was a great success. But we had the parts we were making were for 3,000 aircraft, so we really could make a good industrial setup for that. And
a proper supply chain.
Be competitive in that sense.
Yeah, I think we'll close out the podcast now with another policy question, and I feel that we've already sort of covered this with the last question, but I have been assured that at the recent IODs that policymakers do indeed watch this podcast or listen to it. Whether that's true or not sure. But just in case, speaking directly to policymakers, what's the single most important reform that you would advocate to government to implement, as soon as possible tomorrow? Perhaps we'll go with Dave again to lead off.
So look, I think I probably touched on this in my last response. I think having some sort of adjustment or capability where when a trial succeeds against key criteria up front, that there's some sort of pre-committed contracting route and there's a budget line waiting. I think we talked about the valley of death, and we talked about that place where companies go to die in between a kind of early engagement and actually getting a contract. So, what does it look like inside a company? You win a trial, the end users love it, the people who'd actually use your product, they're the ones championing it internally, and then you kind of get nothing. Not a no. A no would probably be useful because you can focus your energy and resources elsewhere. But silence, I think, when that acquisition machinery turns, meanwhile, you've got your engineers on payroll, your investors are asking about the defence vertical, you're kind of waiting in that limbo land between that successful trial and actually getting a program activated. So how could we have some assurances or something that ensures that we move faster from trial, early validation through to a program actually activating to close that gap and ensure that not as many small to medium companies go to that place where no one wants to go in between pilot and contracting.
And Philippe, your thoughts as well? I have a feeling you might just say make submarine supply chain the F-35 supply chain, but just on your thoughts there on the most important reform.
Certainly, that would be one very good one. Make the submarine the same system as the F-35. But going with Dave as well in that sense, if you could actually go from a prototype, convince some people that it's actually worth having, sign a contract that would be a contract going to the end, to the series, the large series, and have gates in between, sort of say, well, if it doesn't work at that level, the contract stops there. But rather than going to the next gate and then maybe consider, buying if it's successful or have change your ideas, commit to start with and only get, exits possible if the program is not successful, which is always a possibility. But that would give a lot of visibility and a big reward to the companies to sort of make sure that every gate is actually passed, and because there is a bigger for sure after that, and that I think that would work very well. But there's a need to have that cooperation happening between defense, which tend to be very offstandish. They basically say, well, you're on your own. We might give you a contract, we may not. I think in most of other countries, you have a lot more symbiotic sort of relationship between industry and defense. We tend to have purchasing people rather than having partners, and I think it's probably something that could be improved.
I have
Again,
heard.
these are not new ideas,
Yeah.
but the ideas that are not really used that much. at the
Yeah.
present
And
time.
defense is that they want the innovative ones, and this is the conundrum. They want the innovation, but the process, whether it's here or overseas, it can somewhat punish those companies that defense is actively seeking for, because I think innovation lives on speed and feedback, and that kind of gap or that valley that we talk about, it provides neither. So yeah, how do we shrink and close that gap to ensure that we have more successful companies going from successful prototype, as Philippe mentioned, to getting a program activated with very clear gates along the way where everyone is covered that they can drop out at a certain time if it's not meeting certain requirements.
Yeah, yeah, and I will say as well, in terms of from what we hear in defense industry, from defense industry, is that sometimes those procurement, I guess, officials can view it as, well, it's their money. If they're giving away the money, there's almost like a sense of loss, I guess, with depending on funding and things like that to industry. So I don't know if you two have heard that, but thank you very much for coming on the podcast today, David McLaughlin and Philippe Odouard. Sorry, is that right? Yeah. 1 second. Hang on,
Yes,
I'll just cut
thank
that.
you very much.
Did I say that right? Hang on, we'll go again. 1 second. Thank you for coming on the podcast, David. Thank you for coming on the podcast, David McLaughlin and Philippe Odouard. We'd love to have you back. And for more information, please check out defenceconnect.com.au, or you can hit up all our socials except TikTok.